July 16, 1999. This is Investigative Reports.
It was a time when the most powerful city in the world was rendered helpless.
Young girls, I mean, were cutting their hair, they were dyeing their hair, they wouldn't go out to discos and stuff.
I guess that's what was decided upon, was just kind of like a madman on the loose type thing, just to bring some chaos and everything.
David Berkowitz originally claimed he was a lone random gunman, sent on a mission of death by demonic orders from a neighbor's dog. Now he says that story was part of a sham, a carefully orchestrated plan to bring New York City to its knees. Hello, I'm Bill Kurtis. It's been more than 20 years since he held the city of New York hostage, and now David Berkowitz claims he did not act alone. Since his arrest and plea of guilty, the so-called Son of Sam has said little about a violent rampage which ended with 6 young people shot to death and 8 others wounded. He was portrayed then as a madman on the loose. But David Berkowitz is now painting a much different picture of himself. In this edition of Investigative Reports, we present a dramatic in-depth interview with Berkowitz. In it, he maintains that at the time of the murder spree, he was controlled by a satanic cult, that members of the cult helped him, and he names names to prove it. The story this man now tells is not only one of senseless killings, it's also a chilling tale of why the city that never sleeps once lived through a summer-long nightmare.
It was an evil time, it was an ugly time, it was a time I'd like to forget.
His legacy is the most sensational serial crime spree in New York City history. It would begin in the summer of 1976 and end a year later with the arrest of a nondescript postal worker named David Berkowitz.
People of the city of New York can rest easy this morning because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the Son of Sam.
Once caught, David Berkowitz confessed to the year-long rampage of shooting attacks in Queens, the Bronx, and Brooklyn, in which 6 people were killed. There would be no trial, just a quick plea of guilty. Berkowitz was sentenced to life. The great metropolis sighed with relief, the nightmare apparently over. But the celebration may have been premature. New evidence has come to light that could dramatically change the original portrait of a lone madman. Berkowitz now is changing his story, claiming he was a scapegoat, the fall guy for an elaborate Son of Sam murder conspiracy.
When I got involved in this, I never knew that I was going to become a murderer. I never knew that I was going to hurt anybody. I just joined for a thrill, looking for some friends, looking for some companionship, looking for some fun or whatever. You know, I was bored, I was lonely, and I got caught up in something over my head.
That something, says the now 44-year-old, was a satanic cult. Berkowitz broke his silence only once before, in a 1993 television interview with author Maury Terry, who has investigated the case since it began. Now, in a new exclusive interview with Terry, Berkowitz reveals details about a deadly cult that he says claimed his soul.
There was a force of evil that was just so powerful, it's just so powerful, it's beyond any human comprehension or understanding. That evil sucked in a lot of lives.
Berkowitz says he was sucked in by the cult during gatherings at Untermeyer Park in Yonkers.
I just feel this powerful force was just moving me along, to just push me in that direction. Somebody had told me to get a copy of the Satanic Bible. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a Satanic Bible, and he told me to go to a bookstore. It's in any bookstore. I went and got a copy of that and began to read it, and things began to change. It's like a power or a force began to actually reach out to me and kind of take charge over my life, kind of move me along.
He claims he was formally initiated into the cult.
There was a process that took a while, and I did begin to take vows. For a while, I had begun to be partaker of the group with chanting and rituals and various incantations. There were animal sacrifices and other dark and ugly things happening.
Police confirmed they found evidence of animal sacrifices. But Berkowitz says that wasn't enough for the cult.
And this was a time when they began to think about maybe even taking human lives, human sacrifices.
18-year-old Donna Loria would be the first to die. Fatally shot while sitting in a car outside her family's Bronx apartment building in July of 1976. Friend Jody Valente would survive her gunshot wound.
My daughter was 18 years old, and that's what he took out of my heart, 18 years. And I hope they get him. I really, really do.
Police released this sketch of the gunman, but the case remained unsolved. 3 months later, 5 shots were fired through a car in Queens. Rosemary Keenan would not be hit, but Carl De Niro took a bullet directly to the head.
Thought the car exploded. I don't recall hearing shots, but with glasses all over and blood was dripping down my face, so I knew something happened. I feel like I hit my glass.
De Niro never saw his attacker. Barely a month later, a gunman suddenly opened fire at 2 teenage girls sitting on a porch. Both Donna DeMasi and Joanne Lamino were hit, Joanne paralyzed. This time, police released 2 sketches of possible suspects. The attacks continued into a brutal New York City winter. On January 30th, a couple in Forest Hills became the latest targets of terror. 26-year-old Christine Freund died instantly when her boyfriend's car was hit by a hail of bullets. John Deal was uninjured. Police began to theorize a demented madman was preying on women with long, dark hair.
Young girls, were cutting their hair, they were dyeing their hair, they wouldn't go out to discos and stuff.
Police felt the growing public pressure. Detectives released another sketch 6 weeks later, when a stalker fired 1 fatal shot into the face of 19-year-old Virginia Voskerichian as she walked home from school. Police were still hunting for a lone .44 caliber killer. 6 weeks later, another .44 caliber attack. This one in the Bronx, with the murder of a young couple, Valentina Siriani and Alexander Iso. This time, the killer left a calling card, introducing the world to the son of Sam. The letter warned of more murders and contained references to Satanism. 8 weeks after that attack, the killing fields moved back to Queens. The target, another couple, Judy Placido and Sal Lupo, wounded as they sat in a car outside a disco.
I just, city at the time was under siege. It was being held hostage by this guy, and where's he going to strike? When's he going to strike? And it was like it's total, terrorism.
And then, for the first and last time, Son of Sam struck in Brooklyn.
I was covered with blood, and the girl was covered with blood. It was a horror. This guy screaming, just screaming and screaming.
20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz had joked to her mother she was safe, her hair was blonde. Hours later, in a car on a lover's lane, she would be proved very wrong, shot point blank in the head. Her boyfriend, Robert Violante, survived, but was partially blinded.
We do have a description of someone who saw him. I'm hopeful that will be helpful, but if you're asking whether we have any indication of who he is or where he might be, the answer is no.
He's an animal, and animals, like everything else, should be caged, and he should be tortured.
By now, the New York City Police Department had unleashed the largest manhunt in its history to try and stop the killer.
We are increasing the manpower. Members of the force assigned to approximately 300.
Today, Berkowitz says there were at least 5 other killers, 2 of them women.
Was that shooting done by a woman?
Yeah.
Is Berkowitz telling the truth? Many say yes, because they argue he readily admits to being the triggerman in 2 of the attacks and an active conspirator in all of them. He's resigned to spending the rest of his life in prison.
I'm doing life without parole, and that's the real deal. I'm doing consecutive life sentences totaling more than 300 years. There is a parole hearing in the year 2002, but that's not a parole hearing to go out into the street. That's just a parole hearing to sign me over to begin to do my next life sentence. So according to the way the law is, I have to do one life sentence after another, which means in all reality, I'm never getting out.
So which murders does Berkowitz admit he carried out? The first, Donna Loria, and the murder of the young couple in the Bronx. But he is adamant about the others, including the most notorious, the murder of Stacy Moskowitz, the final victim.
Was that you?
I was there at all of them in the area and scouting, and I had a part. I'm responsible for my involvement in those things, and definitely guilty.
But not alone in that guilt, he says.
There was some kind of strategy to just, some people had other ideas. I guess that's what was decided upon, was just kind of like a madman on the loose type thing.
If Berkowitz was indeed a member of some satanic cult, who were they? And what were they trying to achieve? When Investigative Reports returns here on A&E, the son of Sam talks about a group bent on total social chaos.
Satanism kills, but Jesus Christ, he gives life.
He is now a servant of God, born again behind bars. But 20 years ago, David Berkowitz was a soldier of Satan, recruited, he says, to spread evil.
In the darkest part of my life, when I was no longer in my right mind, when I was ugly and vicious and wicked, in all that darkness, all that confusion and all that chaos, God's hands of love reached out to me and picked me up out of that mess.
That mess, says Berkowitz, was the world of the occult. It was a fascination that began innocently enough, a troubled teen looking to fill a void. His childhood, while not perfect, gave few hints of an impending internal storm. He was born out of wedlock and adopted by a Jewish couple in the Bronx.
It was just me and my dad and my mom. And they were a beautiful couple. They gave me as much love as they could and tenderness. But, you know, I had a lot of emotional problems growing up. I had a lot of bouts of very severe depression and behavioral problems. A lot of that, I know today, was as a result of demonic oppression.
He sought escape by joining the Army, but would return to the Bronx 3 years later, still a lost soul.
I didn't have any real friends. I didn't have any real hope or future or goals in mind at the time, just going from day to day, and I felt alienated.
He would then meet a friend who would change his life, Michael Carr, who had a brother named John and a father named Sam, and all would prove to be integral to the saga of Son of Sam.
I met him and at that party, and we just kind of got acquainted. He was basically an outgoing guy with a lot of zip, you know, a lot of wild, crazy ideas. We began to talk about the occult. It just came up. I was kind of like a misfit at the party. I didn't know anybody, so I was just hanging out over there. And we started to rap, and one thing led to another. Wanted to take me to this park, you know, and meet some people.
Those meetings took place at Untermeyer Park, amid the ruins of what had once been a private estate.
You know, I was just a dumb Jewish kid from the Bronx looking for friends, looking to hang out. But now looking back and seeing what had happened, I was being introduced into the occult, into Satanism. It was a recruitment process, a slow but methodical recruitment process, yes.
Recruitment into Satan's army, he now says. Berkowitz reveals the name of the cult he joined for the first time.
Right. Woven deeper into the Westchester group was a mixture of more hardcore individuals, and they were known as the Process in general terms, although they didn't really use that name a lot.
The Process Church of Final Judgment. Confidential federal documents show the group has been investigated for various criminal activities. The Process, first registered as a non-profit religious institution in Louisiana in the 1960s and spread to other states, often changing names. Jesse Turner is a former Process affiliate and hitman, now doing time in Alabama.
The reason for killing people?
Sometimes it would be financial, sometimes it would be vengeful, and sometimes it would just be to keep the ball of evil going.
Is that what they wanted?
Yeah, a social Armageddon. You know, not an Armageddon in the biblical sense, but a social Armageddon.
I mean, this is not just something they were doing for any type of necessary pleasure, but that was just a part of an agenda, a very deep, covert and hidden agenda. You know, they were about making war, and they believed that the end of the world would come around the year 2000, and they believed that Jehovah and Lucifer and Satan were working together to bring about terrible cataclysmic events. And these people were, based on that belief, they were working with Satan to try to bring in a lot of chaos, thinking to speed up the process of all these events happening.
And what better way to create chaos than to slay America's future? Bright young people in middle-class neighborhoods. It was all carefully planned, Berkowitz now reveals. The Son of Sam murders mapped out at a house in Westchester County, north of New York City.
They were high-level occultists, high-level Satanists, high-level process people.
Approximately how many people were at this meeting, all told?
Well, maybe...
in rough numbers?
A couple dozen.
The owner of that house, Berkowitz says, was one of the cult leaders, the man he now identifies in this sketch.
This individual's house. And process members and leaders were there too, and they struck up the plan to go commit the 44 caliber shooting.
Yeah.
The sketch Berkowitz identified was drawn by this man, known as the Artist, who also came to Untermeyer Park in the summer of 1976. He left when talk of ritual and sacrifices became too frightening. 20 years later, police contacted the Artist and took him on a secret journey. Detectives had quietly begun reinvestigating the Son of Sam case.
The police took me to a wake, and I went in, you know, and made sure if it was him or not, and to me it was him.
This is an actual police surveillance photo of the funeral. There are other funerals linked to the process, the result of murder. A federal investigator who asked to be disguised.
There are other people that died as a result of this. There are witnesses. There are other members of process, other members of the satanic organization in Yonkers who died. Other suspects in the Son of Sam case were murdered.
Nearly 24 people linked to the cult have died violently since the arrest of Berkowitz in the summer of 1977. But where does the name Son of Sam come from? Two of those killed were Michael and John Carr, Berkowitz's former neighbors, who he now identifies as triggermen in two of the murders. Their father was Sam Carr, who owned this dog, the same dog Berkowitz originally said had ordered him to kill. He now admits he made the whole story up in order to make himself look crazy. Berkowitz says he doesn't want to name the other shooters because they're still alive and dangerous. How dangerous?
Sort of telltale sign, it's bad shoes. If they feel you are endangering their organization, in my heart, they would hold no punches about killing you.
And that's one reason Berkowitz says he agreed to take the rap for all the murders.
But I didn't want to see anyone in my family hurt. They could have done that easily.
David Berkowitz escaped with his life, but claims he paid for it by taking the fall. He says he was ready when cops came to arrest him. Berkowitz says his arrest was not the result of good police work, but instead that he was set up by the cult. When the Son of Sam returns, the one-time postal worker maintains he became a mere sacrifice for those who controlled him. The break in the sensational case seemed so mundane. It was a parking ticket that led to the arrest of David Berkowitz in August of 1977, after a year-long reign of terror. The police department had their man and were eager to show him off to an anxious public. No one paid much attention to his blasé reaction.
He made a statement along, well, you got me.
But now it's extremely significant, because Berkowitz claims he wasn't surprised, he was tipped off. He says he received a phone call at his apartment telling him the cops were coming.
I knew it was just pretty much going to be, everything was getting groomed for the last few days to just kind of get picked up or something. Somebody knew something and says, well, you're gonna take a fall for this. So it just, it was just being, everything was just being set up.
Set up, he says, by leaders of a cult he now names as the Process Church of Final Judgment. From the late 60s to the mid-70s, the group had a New York headquarters on First Avenue in Manhattan. At least one witness told police she saw Berkowitz entering the building only days before his arrest.
Yeah, I went down there.
More corroboration comes from the artist, who sketched several people during cult meetings in Untermeyer Park.
A guy named Ken. He had a voice like this.
Mm-hmm. Do you know who that individual is?
Yeah, it's Ken.
Do you know where he's from or what he was a part of or anything about him?
He was basically a recruiter and like one of the leaders or elders and brother of the Process and so forth, and moved around,
So this individual is Ken from the Process?
Yeah.
And he was at Untermeyer Park?
Yeah.
The artist also drew something else in the park.
Made an alphabet with the lettering, and later on it seemed like that alphabet was very, very familiar.
Familiar because it was similar to the writing in the Son of Sam letters sent during the killing spree.
It was eerily familiar. It was my letters.
And the artist identifies the person who admired his alphabet in the park.
I believe it was Wheaties. They called him Wheat.
Wheaties, the nickname of John Carr, who Berkowitz names as a Son of Sam triggerman. This seemingly cryptic reference in a Son of Sam letter suddenly becomes very clear. Quote, some names to help you along. John Wheaties, rapist and suffocator of young girls. Significant phrases, at the time labeled the ranting of a madman. On the wall of Berkowitz's apartment, cops found this scrawled next to a punched-out hole. This is Mr. Williams' hole. The artist never knew about that bizarre scrawl, but 20 years later, he can still locate a hole in Untermeyer Park, now covered by underbrush.
It just says, Mr. Williams lives in the hole. They mentioned that they had rituals where they would sacrifice animals, a dog or a cat or chicken or whatever.
Berkowitz says he would become the ultimate sacrifice for the cult.
I was just there to take a fall, man. I was just, you gotta understand what happened. It was like a process, man. It's just, you get brainwashed. You get controlled. You're just a soldier now, and you gotta do what you can to just keep the devil happy and keep everybody happy. And it was a stupid thing, waste. I look back and see that I, was foolish and threw my life away. But at the time, see, once you get caught up in that, man, once you get caught up in that, that's it. I wasn't expecting to live, really. I don't know if I was going to live. I don't know if I was going to die.
The threat was very real, says this former cult member who calls himself Brother John Paul. He considers himself one of the lucky ones. He escaped from the cult.
The only way that you could get out of this thing was either they killed you off, you killed yourself off with a suicide. Okay. That was the only way to get carried out in a pine box.
John Paul says he was first recruited into the cult by none other than John Carr, a former high school classmate.
John talked very specifically about a pyramid, okay, and that to get to another level of this pyramid, he had to turn around and prove that he was worthy of this level and had to kill somebody.
He wouldn't succeed. But according to Berkowitz, John Carr would seriously wound 2 teenage girls in the 3rd Son of Sam attack.
The next shooting was in Queens of Joanne Lamino and Donna DeMasi. Is it a fact that the shooter that night was John Carr?
He's not living anymore, you know.
Right.
He died shortly after I was arrested.
Right.
John Carr was murdered in North Dakota, just 6 months after Berkowitz's arrest. Authorities there believe it was connected to the Son of Sam case.
First, it was thought to have been a suicide, but subsequent investigation, interviews, lead us to believe that it's very likely a homicide.
Nearly 20 years later, that murder is still unsolved. In 1979, John's brother Michael died in a high-speed auto accident in Manhattan. Berkowitz now names Michael as the shooter of Judy Placido and Sal Lupo.
Yeah, it's real painful. It's really a bummer just even talking about this. My life is at a stage now where, like, you know, you're talking about a stranger. You're talking about things that happened that were a nightmare. I just want to bury them in the sea of forgetfulness. I want to move on with my life. I can't undo the past, and so many people were hurt and destroyed. It's unbelievable.
Next, Berkowitz offers more evidence he did not act alone. And we learn how some members of the New York Police Department were recently stopped from reopening the Son of Sam case.
44 caliber bulldog.
This was the gun that sealed the fate of David Berkowitz. At a news conference beamed around the world, cops bragged they had nabbed the 44 caliber killer. Today, Berkowitz claims there were other 44 caliber revolvers involved, held by other people.
There were some others around. There were some other people had the same gun. Other people had bullets. And a lot of weapons, really. There's other stuff, too. It just never turned up, but they were around.
Today, Berkowitz offers new evidence that he did not act alone, and that members of a murderous cult orchestrated and participated in all the Son of Sam murders.
The shooting of Christine Freund in Queens. Is it true that there were 3 or 4 or even more out there that night?
Yeah, some people around. We always had a backup vehicle. And
Berkowitz also dismisses another theory, that he was a madman on the loose.
The public had the impression that all of the 44 shootings were random. Is that true?
Not my understanding, not all of them, no.
In fact, he says each killing was a premeditated execution. It was no coincidence that a friend of the first victim, Donna Loria, warned of her death a week before she died. From the police report, Donna has 1 week to live. Berkowitz's new claim has some unlikely supporters, including Donna's father.
Him, I want. And the other parents should go with the others. I think they all should be caught.
Berkowitz confirms he wasn't the only hired gun of the cult. This composite sketch of the killer of the 5th victim backs him up. It may look like a man, but it was actually a woman.
The woman who pulled the trigger that night, she was a member of this cult?
Yeah.
Is it a fact that she was from Westchester County?
Yeah, I knew her from there.
This composite sketch is of the person who killed Stacy Moskowitz, the final victim. The sketch of a blonde-haired man was never released by police. Berkowitz says he wasn't the shooter. This former NYPD officer worked on the case.
If Son of Sam was a nut job, why are there 3 cars, 5 different descriptions, different height, different shapes, different sizes of the perpetrator? If somebody else was there.
Shooting victim Carl De Niro believes there were others.
I mean, it wasn't robbery. That you can understand. That might not be right, but you can understand it. I don't know. I'd like to know what the motive was. Why, you know, even if I was random, why was somebody driving around looking for somebody to shoot for no good reason?
These police reports say there were several vehicles at crime scenes, the most notable being a yellow Volkswagen speeding away after the murder of Stacy Moskowitz.
At this point, we have not been able to say that any one car is the car that belonged to this person, including the yellow Volkswagen that was reported in the paper.
But the official hunt for the VW and any other evidence would end with Berkowitz's arrest. Sources have tied an identical VW to the Carr family, the neighbors who turned Berkowitz in. But he never owned a VW. Those same sources claim the New York police began reinvestigating a Son of Sam conspiracy last year, but top officials ordered the case shut down.
The reason goes all the way to the top of the department. You do not want to embarrass this department. I believe from what we saw, there was a lot of botches in the case. Ballistics, they messed up searches and seizures at the time of Berkowitz's arrest and prior to his arrest.
Sources point to a midnight search of this brownstone, once owned by suspected pornographer, drug dealer, and photographer Ronald Sisman. He and his girlfriend, Elizabeth Platzman, were murdered execution-style on Halloween, 1981. The reason for the search by police? The source says the department believes Sisman had photographed the murder of Stacy Moskowitz and had hidden a copy of the film known as a snuff film. For the first time ever, Berkowitz says one existed.
This time when the sacrifice had been made, this is all, part of the ritual and everything, and there was some filming going on. Somebody wanted to film it for somebody else or whatever.
Berkowitz says there were 3 people in a van at the Moskowitz murder filming the shooting, and the evidence mounts. This self-confessed process hitman named Jesse Turner says he was hired to kill Ron Sisman by a world-renowned artist.
Who approached you to take care of Ron Sisman?
Robert Mapplethorpe.
Why?
Because Ron Sisman had possession of some snuff films.
The late Robert Mapplethorpe, a controversial artist known for his graphic and some say pornographic work. Turner lived with Mapplethorpe in the early 1970s.
Robert was not a member of the process. He was associated with the process. The process, they were using each other.
There was a snuff film, then what happened with it?
After the church ordered it?
Yes.
Well, there were several copies made. Robert explained it to me and said, look, Sisman's got these films, and most importantly, he's got the Moskowitz film. We discussed him dying, yes.
Turner claims the murders were actually carried out by 2 accomplices who recovered 5 snuff films. He told the same story to New York City police last year, but soon after the investigation was stopped.
They learned that the investigation led on into the Son of Sam case, and that there were things were messed up during that case. Of course, it would be embarrassing to an agency who had done botched up an investigation and not looked forward into it. There's murderers running loose on the street today, and they didn't put them in jail.
Some other unlikely believers of the cult theory, the parents of Stacy Moskowitz, who spoke in this 1993 interview.
I had to hate somebody. And the only one I knew, the only name I got was Berkowitz. So I had to hate David.
In my opinion, the New York Police Department covered it up. The city covered it up.
I don't know what the New York City police did. I still don't know what they did.
I feel the city did wrong. They never followed up the case. And I heard quotes from judges that this case would break wide open in New York. And when it does, there's going to be a lot of heads rolling.
Mrs. Moskowitz has corresponded with Berkowitz.
This letter has been in my prison cell for 3 years, and I never answered it. But she wrote me the most beautiful letter a person could write to someone else, especially a person who was in some way responsible for harm being done to their family. And I would just like to thank her personally from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to answer this letter one day when I get the courage to do that. There's so much pain involved to even face these things, but I'm truly blessed. I'm truly blessed.
The blessed and the cursed. Those familiar with the cult believe it is still active, just masquerading under a different cloak.
They have disguised themselves again, and they always change their names.
It's so in-depth that it would take an army of police officers, or it would take somebody with power, guts, and influence to shut these guys down and make them go to some other country.
Berkowitz agrees.
They're definitely dangerous. I think that today, I mean, I've been locked up behind prison walls for 20 years, but I feel, it's my hunch that they've become more sophisticated, more covert. It's my hunch that they have really gone down deep.
Hidden but just as powerful. Berkowitz believes young people of today are just as susceptible as he was 20 years ago to the power of the occult. Coming up, Berkowitz reveals how the cult continued to control his life in prison. When Investigative Reports continues here on A&E. The anger against David Berkowitz was so explosive, when he was finally arrested, police were forced to set up a dragnet of protection. But if the most hated man in America thought he'd find more security behind bars, he was wrong. In 1979, a still unnamed inmate cut Berkowitz's throat. But even then, he believes Satan ruled his soul.
I was still doing rituals and incantations in my cell. I did not find peace back then. I had no hope. I was still, like you might say, programmed to just stay in one mode.
This former felon spent 16 years in prison with Berkowitz and has collected many of his poems, never released publicly. There are more than 70 altogether. All are signed by David Berkowitz except one, entitled They Met at Night, which is signed by Son of Sam. It describes stalking prey, a prince who hates the day. Most of his writings are ripe with references to demons, the devil, and darkness. In one, called The Virus, he writes, "Like the devil who does his dirty work in darkness, I slip unannounced through a carelessly unguarded open back door, leaving me to explore a pitch-black cavern as I look to make my abode among fellow thieves. A forever hunter, I'll hound and wound my prey until eternity tells me to stop sucking away my host's slowly ebbing life force."
With times when I was talking to him, I felt like I was sitting with the devil, and that I was talking with the devil, and I touched the devil or some sort of devilish beast. Just the look on his face, the glare in his eye, it's hard to define.
It wasn't until several years later, Berkowitz says, that another inmate showed him the light, introducing him to Jesus Christ and the Bible.
He brought me to faith in Christ, and that's when a lot of changes began to take place. That's when a lot of cleansing began to come into my life. A time of sorrow that I've been going through, a time of agonizing sorrow, was coming to a close in many ways.
But closing one chapter would open another. Berkowitz says his faith has now forced him to tell the truth about the cult, which conspired to carry out the Son of Sam murders. But he maintains the process was much more than a cult. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise.
There was, a lot of other crimes of homicides and things, and there was a heavy drug trafficking and other things involving children. That was not anything I was into. I mean, I knew people in that area. They were into child pornography, and there was other people that were into that thing, where they wanted that, and they would provide that.
This former NYPD officer worked undercover for years, often posing as a pornographer.
Some of those same people I dealt with, I arrested for promoting prostitution by selling me children for $20 for sex, were later identified as being members in 1976 or affiliates or associates of the process.
One of the names mentioned by both law enforcement authorities and Berkowitz is that of Roy Radin, a flamboyant show business producer murdered in Los Angeles in 1983. In the 70s, he'd owned a notorious estate on Long Island.
It's unbelievable the things that transpired in there, and I have them from first-hand conversations. I don't make it up. Parading around little girls, little boys, no clothes on, for sex. All of it's filmed.
Hardly a stretch to Berkowitz's claim that snuff films were made of the final Son of Sam victim, Stacy Moskowitz. Berkowitz confirms one of those in a van filming was an associate of Roy Radin.
Yeah, some big people wanted to get in on that, and there's some other people taking care of that as far as making arrangements.
They will see the film later on for a set fee. I understand some of those snuff films go for like $50,000.
Johnson says he learned young boys might be buried in Untermeyer Park back in the early 70s, several years before the Son of Sam shootings had begun. The same park where Berkowitz claims the cult held their rituals. Berkowitz actually tried to warn authorities about the cult. He left a letter, withheld by police, in his apartment at the time of his arrest. It says a long-existing satanic cult had set a goal of murdering 100 people.
Maybe there's a part of me that wanted to stop everything, but I mean, I was just trained to be a soldier and just keep my mouth shut and go with the program and stand alone if need be, you know.
But police sources say no one cared. The NYPD investigation was closed, but the .44 caliber shootings did stop. This federal investigator has an explanation.
You were done. And if David Berkowitz is in custody, why would you go back and shoot somebody with a .44 caliber firearm? There is no reason to do that. They wanted them to believe that it was over.
They have a way of just, it's just unbelievable. They have a way of just masking over everything. They go right into hiding. They're trained like that. That's part of the plan, to just cover the tracks real quick and move on. And once they find out that law enforcement people are maybe zeroing in on anything that they're doing, whatever it is, they have a way of just vanishing.
The investigator says the process moved out of New York shortly after the Son of Sam murders, but he and others are still quietly tracking the cult, and they believe, with a concentrated effort, there could be other arrests. How many?
From the investigation, I would say probably about 12 or 13 people could be indicted that are still alive today.
Indicted for the Son of Sam murders. But sources say many more people may be involved with the cult by offering clandestine financial support. And Berkowitz believes those same people are prepared to seek out new, young recruits in any community.
You know, like they're losing their fear of the devil. And this is a grooming process. A lot of kids today have no concept whatsoever of the dangers that are involved in any form of the occult, how quickly a bondage could form, how quickly a person's mind and spirit could be taken over by some kind of entity.
Ironically, Berkowitz isn't the one pushing for a new investigation into occult conspiracy. That's coming from members of law enforcement who've looked hard at the evidence and who believe that election year politics dictated the truth.
The mayor, you know, pressuring the police department for a conclusion to this.
At the height of the Son of Sam killing spree, the incumbent mayor, Abe Beam, was double digits behind in the polls. He still lost the election 3 months later, but just barely. And scores of police officers won promotions based on solving the most infamous case in New York City crime. In the fall of 1998, the Yonkers Police Department determined that there was evidence that Berkowitz did not act alone and that he and his supposed accomplices were indeed members of a cult. That investigation continues. Berkowitz is now serving 6 consecutive 25 years to life terms and isn't expected to ever be paroled. In an upstate New York maximum security prison where he is now housed, Berkowitz earns about 21 cents an hour, working as a clerk and typist for chaplain services. In 1997, he wrote a letter to the New York Daily News in which he said he now finds solace in praying for his victims. It's doubtful that a city that lived through a summer of fear will find any solace in that.